Hi, I'm Rob, N1NUG. Today I want to show you how I mounted my ham radio in this 2024 Subaru Outback. I've already posted a video showing how I installed this Comet SBB5 dual band antenna on a fog light bracket up here on my hood. If you want to see that, I'll leave a link down below. But for now, let's get into the radio install. First, I'll start under the hood and show you how I have everything connected up to the battery. Starting with the battery, I'm going to pull this plastic cover off. Now you can see I've got the positive wire connected up with a ring terminal to the positive battery post. Now there's actually enough of a stud here for me to put my own nut over here and tighten everything down without having to undo anything that was already on the car. And you can even see all the anti-corrosion grease from the factory is still here and intact. Now speaking of the wire, the section that I've got going from under the hood up to the distribution block that I have under the dash is all 10 gauge wire. I've got the positive wire routed down here around the fuse block. And speaking of fuses, here's my inline fuse for the positive wire. You can see I've got a 30 amp fuse in here. And I've just got the wire routed down here around the brake reservoir bracket. And then right here you can see this black section. This is actually two Anderson power poles connected together with some heat shrink tubing over them. This way, if I ever need to change this wiring or take it out of the car for some reason, I can just cut the shrink tubing, disconnect the power poles, and get everything out of here pretty quickly. Looking back here behind the fuse box, you can see I've got my negative wire connected up to a chassis point right here. And again, with a ring terminal and 10 gauge wire. Now, obviously the fuse holder has red wire, and that's because I got a 5-pack of these all in the same color. It was just a little bit cheaper that way. I did put some black heat shrink tubing on this side, but I didn't do it on this side. But you can see on the other end of my Anderson power pole disconnect that has heat shrink tubing over it, I've got black wire on this side running inside the car. And again, if I pop up the cover on the fuse holder, I've got a 30 amp fuse on the negative side as well. The wires then run together underneath this plastic cover and then down through here behind the fender where sort of the door jamb is. If I pop open the door, we can see that the wire routes here from the fender down behind the door hinges and goes into the car through this rubber boot right here where all the door wiring kind of comes through and goes into the door. In order to get this wire through here, I had to poke a hole with a tool, and then I opened it up a little bit with a round file that I had, and then I was able to kind of pull this through the opening using some fish line and a little WD-40 to lubricate the wire, and we were good to go. So now I'll pull out the floor mat and I'll pop this trim up so you can see how I've done some of the wiring. So if we take a look over here on the other side of the door jamb, you can see this is where my power wires are coming through. So I will pull this out of the way because we're going to want to look under there. So I really can't show the wiring because it's running kind of underneath this lip right here, and it's hard to get the camera and the light in there. But what I do want to draw your attention to is this black box right here. This is actually my external speaker, which I've just kind of wedged up in there amongst all the other stuff. It's not interfering with anything. It's well away from the pedals or anything else, but it is just kind of resting in there. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute. So if we now look at the other side of the driver's side footwell, you can see right here I've got an Anderson power pole distribution block. The main wiring from the battery is right here, and then over here on this set of connectors we've got the wiring going off to the radio itself. And of course I've got some more open ports here if I want to add more stuff. This wire that you see here zip tied up to the main power wire is actually the control wire that goes between the radio and the control head. And we'll talk a little bit more about that in a minute as well. The wiring for the radio just runs behind the plastic trim for the center console here. And this is open at the bottom, so I was able to just tuck that up by hand into there. And the radio body itself is here underneath the driver's seat. Let's go in the back seat and take a look at that now. If we take a look underneath the rear of the driver's seat, we can see the radio body is sitting right here. Now I've got it mounted, I'll call it somewhat temporarily, on this metal doghouse that's here, that's part of the car. I'm not exactly sure what's under there. It might be a computer module. I've got the radio and its bracket mounted on top of it what I'll call somewhat temporarily with some 3M hook and loop tape. This is the same type of stuff that you might use to attach your Easy Pass transceiver to your windshield. Now this stuff actually works pretty good and holds the radio in place, albeit a little bit wobbly. Now it does require a little bit of force to kind of demate it, so it should hold at least for now. And I'll explain why I'm considering this a temporary mount at the end of the video. If we get in here and take a little bit of a closer look, you can see here's the power wire coming from underneath the center console. It's coming under the seat rail into the standard T connector that comes with the radio and into the radio itself. This wiring here is a little bit messy. And again, as I keep saying, I'm considering this sort of a temporary installation at the moment, so I haven't permanently tied this up yet. It's kind of coiled up here. It's out of the way. It's not bothering anybody, but I will neaten it up once I get the final configuration figured out. Now right here, we've got the antenna wire, and this also routes under the seat and under the center console trim. But instead of going out the driver's side rubber grommet where the door wiring goes, it goes out the passenger side. And again, I detailed the installation of the antenna in a separate video, which is linked below if you want to watch that when you're done with this one. And then lastly over here, I've got the wire for the external speaker. That's actually routing to the opposite side of the radio and underneath the trim that goes along the kind of rocker plate right there. And this came loose when I pulled off the trim, but this is just kind of sitting in here in this channel along with the factory wiring. And it goes up under here under the dash to where the speaker is, where I showed you, where it's just kind of placed up in there. Now I will admit that the audio from the speaker is slightly muffled being mounted under the dash, especially when all the kick plates are in place. However, I am willing to kind of compromise that audio quality a little bit versus having an ugly speaker up here somewhere on the dash or in the way of my passengers. And now for the part you've probably been waiting for, the radio control head. I've got it mounted to the left of the steering wheel, clipped to the heating vent with a Lido vent mount that I found on Amazon. Now, if I hop in the car and close the door, you can see that there's just enough room to have the radio head over here with a little bit of space to spare. Now, as you can see, it's kind of close to my headlight stock, but it doesn't interfere with it at all. Even when I kind of tilt the wheel in and out, it doesn't seem to be interfering at all. Now, if I lean back in my normal driving position, you can see that the radio screen is quite visible over here, and the volume control and the left side buttons are easily accessible and seen. However, the left side buttons are obscured by the steering wheel, and the headlight stock kind of does get in my way with changing channels just a little bit. I've got to bring my left hand in and kind of hold it kind of at a funny angle to change the channels. And when I do, I'm blocking my vision of the screen. So I've almost got to kind of go like this or like this to change the channel when I'm driving. But aside from the weirdness of changing the channel and blocking the control screen when I do it, I like having the radio over here out of the way. I did consider using one of those seat bolt mounts that has a stock that kind of comes up and has the radio kind of live over in this area. But I didn't like the idea of having it in the way of the touch screen over here, possibly blocking my storage cubby, which is already kind of small and blocked by my cell phone charger, or the shifter. And I also felt that it might be in the way of my passengers over here, so I opted not to go that route. And like I said, I'm pretty happy with it over here. The wire that connects the control head to the radio body is just routing down here between this gap between the steering column and the dashboard trim. And then the wire just routes underneath the dash, along with the power wire, right to where that Anderson power pole block is. And you may have actually already seen it in my previous clip, but I've got it zip tied to the power wire right there. And then it just follows the radio power wire behind the console trim and then down under the seat to the radio where we saw it kind of coiled up there next to it. Now, one thing I haven't 100% figured out yet is the microphone. Now, right now you can see it's living in this cup holder, but I don't really want it to live there permanently. Especially when my wife and I go on a road trip, we'll each want a bottle of water or coffee or something like that, and we'll want to use that cup holder. So in that case, the microphone ends up kind of going here and living in this cubby. But as you can see, it's not really a good fit, and it kind of just stretches and kind of gets in the way. even though I'm using an extension cable on the microphone, which is plugged into the radio body down there below the seat. So what I'm leaning towards now is grabbing a mic clip and attaching it to the plastic here using some of that 3M hook and loop tape I was talking about earlier, and just kind of have it live over here. If it's over here when I'm not using it, it should be out of the way. I really shouldn't bump it with my knee when I'm driving, since this is sort of recessed. But if I do want to use it, I can quickly grab it. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the way the installation has turned out so far. It's actually fairly clean and unobtrusive in the car, and the radio seems to work fairly well and is comfortable to use in the position that I've got it mounted. But as I mentioned in an earlier clip, this is somewhat still in flux because I do have a second radio that I plan to install in this car. That radio is an FT891. And my plan is to install the radio body under the seat along with the radio body for the FTM 300, and then have the control head up here above or below it somewhere. I haven't completely worked any of that out yet, nor do I know what antenna I'm going to use. I do know that I'm going to have the radio set up so that it's going to be running 6 meters most of the time while I'm driving, and then I want to be able to quickly disconnect the 6-meter antenna and switch that over to HF for POTA use. I don't plan to use HF while I'm driving. But we'll talk more about that in the future when I have my plans all solidified and I do the installation in the car. But for now, I do want to show you one thing about this installation that I don't like and may be problematic when I get around to installing that FT891. Obviously the radio is on right now, and I've got it set up so it's displaying the band scope. And you can see right now we're not seeing any signals on the band scope whatsoever. Now if I take a lean back, you can see that the car is completely off. None of the electronics are on except for this center screen letting us know the doors are open. However, if I put the car in accessory mode, keep an eye on that display screen. You can see that as soon as the car comes on, we're getting all kinds of background noise and background hash there. Now, it's obviously not coming through and breaking the squelch because the radio's auto squelch function is kind of keeping that at bay. But it is significantly raising the noise floor. You may have already noticed in the earlier clips that I don't have any ferrites or toroids or anything on the radio wiring. But I'm not so sure that that's going to help anything. And let me show you why. I'm actually going to remove the antenna from the car, and we're going to repeat the test that we just did. Radio's on, car is off. If I turn the car on, you can see that there's no noise coming through the radio. It's dead silent like it was with the car off. And just to show that the car is on, you can see the screen is lit up, and of course the chime is going off. So what I think is happening is that because the antenna is so close to all the electronics in the dashboard, especially that big center screen that this car has, that we're just picking up all the RFI that the car is radiating. And adding toroids and ferrites to the power wiring on my ham radio isn't going to do a damn thing. I think the only thing that I can do to kind of mitigate that noise would be to move this antenna to the rear of the vehicle. But even then, I'm not so sure that it would completely solve the problem. I guess I'll have to do an experiment and try at some point. If you would have done something different in your install, let me know down below. Thanks for watching.